Listen, I want to start in a space of really grappling with what's happening right now, in the fact that you have come under a whole lot of attack. I think throughout the entirety of your representation of your district in the state of Texas, and it seems in some ways to those of us who are watching that those attacks appear to be increasing in some ways. How are you? How is your safety? And what are you considering in terms of keeping yourself safe as you navigate all the things that we often just read about?
Yeah, so interesting question. Um, I tell people all the time when I go and I speak various places, talk about just kind of member safety. That as someone who's represented members of the Aryan Brotherhood, as someone who has represented real life killers, I never had concerns about my safety, or at least I never had death threats. It wasn't until I started to represent people that were looking for the basics like healthcare and food, and education and access to capital that somehow that became so contentious that I ended up being kind of under attack to the extent that we do have to invest in security quite often. I have more death threats than I can count. And it's a really sad state of kind of where we are with political violence in general. We know that there was a man who was plotting a murder on Hakeem Jeffries, who was just arrested this week. Um, and it's even more disgusting that no matter who it is that's impacted, I can't find an instance of those of us that are elected Democrats where we've not denounced the violence. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's a two-way street, and it just goes down to kind of who we are. We have people that are going around saying that they're Christians, but when it comes to having any type of moral compass, I don't know what type of Christianity they follow, but they seemingly have no morals or ethics about them. And I think that that is a greater issue that we as citizens have. But listen, I believe that God doesn't put more on me than I can bear. And he's not giving me a spirit of fear. So I just keep pushing, and I'm thankful to all of those that do support me with a dollar donation, $5 donations. They add up. They add up to the extent that we are able to make sure that we invest in that protection. And I've mentioned a number of times that I'm being fitted for a bulletproof vest.
Mm, my God. You know, when you mentioned the political violence, as somebody who is a student of history, I am reminded of the fact that when it came to the destruction of Reconstruction, and those of you who may recall, Reconstruction is this period after the Civil War where black men got the right to vote vis-a-vis the 15th Amendment. We were electing people into office. You had elected representatives up and down from local to state levels. And when white nationalist violence, after the Northern troops pull out with the Compromise of 1877, that white nationalist violence grew to such a fever pitch that there is one document that was quoted by Michael Harriot, which read that by the time the white nationalists had gotten through with physically beating black elected officials to get out, and their supporters to get out of office in the state house where they were at, that the floor was, quote, left slick with blood. And so, Representative Crockett, when we're talking about safety, this is not something that's out of left field. These are very serious times that we're in, and considering we are seeing the destruction of integration following many of the same paths that the destruction of Reconstruction took, it seems to me that concern for physical safety is paramount. And as you mentioned, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who's actually my congressman, as you mentioned, he himself, we learned that, just recently, that there had been a threat to his life, and the person who had carry or attempted to carry out that threat has been arrested. But these are very serious times, and Representative Crockett, as a black woman, among the most disrespected demographic in the nation, as Malcolm X reminded us, the dangers, I
Mhm.
would imagine, are particularly fraught for you. And so, y'all, those donations don't necessarily just go to signs. When we're talking about these sorts of security measures, Representative Crockett, as I understand it, you all pay for that out of money that's not something that the government provides for you. Am I correct?
No, unfortunately not. I mean, we spend unlimited amounts of money to keep the president safe, and the justices all get more than $1 million apiece, specifically for their security. But as a co equal branch of government, it's only been here in the last few months that they basically did this thing where they would give us access to $5,000 a month, and we're not allowed to use it anytime we're in DC. We can use it elsewhere. And they just bumped it up after Charlie Kirk, was killed to $10,000. And then it's basically you go and you figure it out on your own. Which part of that I'm okay with, just because I need to know who it is that's supposed to have my back. But it's difficult. I travel all the time, and if you're in elected leadership within the House, and you've got to be pretty high up in elected leadership, then you get a full detail. But they're the only people in the House that get details. Same thing with the Senate. They're the only ones in the Senate that get details. The rest of us kind of fend for ourselves, and try to figure it out. And listen, there's some great teams that I work with in various cities that make sure that they are doing everything that they can to keep me safe. But I do think that it's unfortunate that in times like this, it is a direct correlation with the work that I'm doing, and I'm having to pay for that myself and figure it out. And not everyone is able to raise the money to make sure that they can pay for their safety. And I just feel like it's wrong, because we all should be safe as elected members of Congress.
Now, your personal safety is also indicative as to the state of issues currently plaguing the nation. The government is now, I believe, on what, day 22 of a shutdown. And as shutdown, as we have been explaining it here on these airwaves, that was triggered because you, as a part of the Democratic body, all of you have decided enough is enough. It seems that there have been some really significant lines drawn in the sand. And we have been talking about this shutdown as a function of Democrats saying we are not going to allow the Republicans to create a situation where insurance premiums are going up 2-3 times per family, where we are going to lock into existence these cuts that were included in that big awful bill. I have another name for it, but I'm gonna try to keep my cussing to a minimum while we have company here, y'all. Y'all know what I call the bill. And so we're in a situation right now where your personal safety isn't something that's sort of an aberration. It's really indicative as to the overall state of the nation. Talk to us about this government shutdown, and then I want to move into understanding what's happening with redistricting in your state, and then before we get to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so long story short, I want people to understand that the big ugly bill only passed the House by one vote. We did have Republicans that voted with us, not necessarily for the same reasons, but it only passed by one vote. And at that time, the Democrats were missing 3 votes because we had 3 members of Congress that died, and we were waiting on special elections. As of now, only one of those seats has been filled. The second seat, we know that he won't swear her in. And then the third seat, they're actually voting down in Houston in a special election on November 4th to go ahead and try to fill that seat. So I think that there's a larger conversation to be had about how important it is that, just like we're assessing and or we're trying to assess the physical and mental health of the president, that we really need to be thoughtful about the people that we send to DC, especially with these very tight lines, that we need to feel assured that they are healthy enough to be able to serve, because it can have these disastrous results. Now, what happened is that in the House, we didn't have the votes. So the bill was able to pass out of the House. The bill is what we call a stopgap or a continuing resolution. It's interesting because we're continuing on from us not doing our appropriations the entirety of last fiscal year. And so, these people are not serious. They go in, they talk a lot, but the very basic job that we're supposed to do is to pass appropriations. And they did not do it. They just continued to do continuing resolutions. And the biggest issue with that is that it allows too much latitude, because basically it's like, okay, we'll throw more money into this pot. We have a total of 12 appropriations bills. When you think of your bills at home, you've got your rent, you've got your car note, you've got your insurance. They're categorized out like that to take care of the entire federal government. And usually you have a line item. This is how much you spend in this category, in this category. And that's not what it is. So long story short, big ugly bill is taking $1 trillion out of healthcare. We spent a lot of time talking about how many people will be kicked off their Medicaid, Medicare, but we did not talk about the bigger picture, which is if you remove $1 trillion from the healthcare industry, it has to go and find that money somewhere to keep their lights on. And so what's happened is everyone is going to be impacted to the extent that their premiums are going up. Add injury to insult, basically, is what we are about to experience now. Come December, the Affordable Care Act tax credits are going to expire. With the expiration of that, that means that this money that people are returned to them, money that they paid in, this tax credit, that money will not be there. So now, not only are your premiums going up because of the big ugly bill, but now they're going to go up as well because of the affordable tax credit being removed for those that are still on the ACA. So we've got that particular issue that is brewing, and Senate Democrats held the line. To be perfectly honest, I wish they would have held the line in March. Unfortunately, bygones are bygones, but they're holding the line right now, and seemingly Donald Trump has no interest in negotiating or talking. So frankly, I don't think that this shutdown is going to end unless the federal workers make it end. That is how the last shutdown that we had, and it was under this president, it ended because air traffic controllers banded together and didn't show up. Now they changed the law because they realized how much power they have, but it is important for us to have our federal workers think about how they can show them who's boss, and it's really the federal workers, not us. You wanted to move on to redistricting, I'm guessing now.
I do want to talk about redistricting, but actually let's take a slight detour and go to the Supreme Court first, because we heard oral arguments last week in Louisiana versus Calais, a case that is going to have significant impacts and might do the work of destroying what's left of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And folks, we've talked about this extensively. We know that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was destroyed vis-a-vis Shelby County v. Holder back in 2013. Actually, I shouldn't say Section 5 was destroyed. Section 4, which was the formula for determining which states would be covered by the preclearance provision of Section 5, was destroyed. Congress was not able to, or chose not to, reevaluate that formula. I personally believe it was because far more jurisdictions would be included under a preclearance regime than had even been included at that time. And for those who don't remember, preclearance is this notion that says if you have a history of discriminating against people as it pertains to the electoral outcomes or the vote in your community, in your electoral district, you have to get changes to your electoral profile or paradigm approved, pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. And so we heard oral arguments, Representative Crockett, on last week that essentially seemed to indicate that the 6-3 conservative, I like to call it a white nationalist conservative majority, seems to be poised to side with those parties who are seeking to end our ability to find relief under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which means we would not be able to file suit to protect the diminution of our rights. Talk to us about what this is going to mean, because by my calculations, it seems as though we might be going into a 2026 midterm election as Black voters with fewer protections, or at least the same sorts of protections that our ancestors had when they were walking off of plantations in 1865. Do you see it differently?
Yeah, man, you just laid that down. Yes, so a couple of things. So Section 2, in my kind of best explanation of it, is a further iteration of the Constitution. And so it is why it would be so insidious to get rid of Section 2. And we know that with the eradication of Section 5, we've seen those states that historically would have necessitated preclearance, such as Texas, because Texas has always been found to be intentionally racially discriminatory. And this is by the most conservative courts that you can find. So that's how bad it has to be for conservative courts to be finding that Texas is intentionally racially discriminatory. And I have been engaged in litigation since 2021 over the current maps in Texas. And now they've decided to double down and make them worse. And with what is currently pending before the Supreme Court, my seat in Texas is what you consider to be a Section 2 seat. Now, excuse me, I just want to park it there for a second, because you talked about Black representation. Even though Section 2 still exists, when you look at the seats that have been under attack, the seats that are under attack as they're scheming through Missouri, as they've gone through Texas, as they plotted and talked about hitting South Carolina, as they are going through Ohio, as they are talking about, or actually they've started the process in North Carolina, as they're looking to go into Florida. I will tell you that the Black Caucus has reached a historic number of members. And just because you're in the Black Caucus doesn't necessarily mean that you have a Section 2 seat. But I will tell you that if there is any amount of representation that has been directly targeted, it is Black representation. Texas has more African Americans than any other state. Yet under this current map, what we are looking at is they are only looking to make it to where Black people have an opportunity to choose 2 seats. If this Supreme Court um, hearing goes the wrong way, then we're talking about Black people not being able to choose any specific seat. Their voices will be diluted to the extent that they will just be thrown into these random districts where they have nothing in common with their neighbors. And they basically will just be, their bodies will be used as numbers to make up the districts, but to dilute their voices. So, right now, with us having more African Americans than any other state, under the current map that they've done, our voices will count 1/5 as it relates to our voting strength, 1/5 of that of our white Texans. That's what they did to us. We're not even 3/5, we're 1/5. And our Latino brothers and sisters are approximately 1/3 as it relates to voting strength, because 69% of the state, I'm sorry, 61% of the state, 61% of the state is people of color, 39% of the state are Anglos, yet almost 80% of the seats that will go to DC will be chosen by the 39%. We're talking about minority rule. That is what we've been under. That is why they don't want DC to have statehood. These are the things that they've been doing. They've been playing for keeps. And unfortunately, we had bills that could have fixed all of this. We had the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We had the Freedom to Vote Act that could have fixed a lot of the things that we are struggling with right now. And they passed the House. But the Senate did not feel like this was worthy enough to get rid of the filibuster. And I can't think of anything more worthy. So we will still have the Constitution no matter what. But it's not as, obviously it's not as strong, right? It's always supposed to be what reigns supreme. But they are truly watering down every protection that we could imagine that has come within our laws, including the Constitution right now. When you start to question things like birthright citizenship, which is quite clear, right? When you start to question things such as due process, which is quite clear.